Hello, I'm Lauren Haldeman, Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Nutrition Education and Behavior, where we're advancing research, practice, and policy. Each month, we select an article to feature as a press release with an accompanying podcast. And today's podcast article can be read in full at www.jneb.org for free for the next 3 months. And today I'm really happy to be speaking with Drs. Maudrie and Cassandra Nguyen, who are co-authors for the article titled Community Engaged Development of a Nutrition Curriculum, the Go Healthy Indigenous-Supported Agricultural Study. I'm really glad to have you both with us today. It's a little bit different. Usually we just have a single author on, so I'm glad to have both of you. So can you each tell a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I can start. Buju Mishkwa Nangukwe and Jijnakas, Babatang Ndojiva, Mikanakandudim. Greetings, my relatives. My English name is Tara Maudrie. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Sault Ste. Marie Nation of Chippewa Indians. I'm Snapping Turtle Clan, and I currently live in Sault Ste. Marie. I recently finished my PhD at Johns Hopkins in the Social Behavioral Interventions program, where I also did my master's in the nutrition program. And I'm joining the University of Michigan School of Social Work faculty this fall, or fall 2025, I should say. And most of my work really centers on Indigenous nutrition and food systems, as well as defining health concepts through Indigenous worldviews and values. And I'll pass it to my co-first author, Cassandra.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. I am Cassandra Nguyen, an assistant professor of cooperative extension at the University of California, Davis, in the Department of Nutrition. And the work that I do really focuses on bridging the gap between what we know and what we do about food insecurity in the US, with a particular focus in collaboration with Tara and others with Indigenous communities across the US as we focus on supporting healthy lifestyles for everyone. Thank you for having us.
Sure thing. Yeah, thanks for that. And I mentioned before we got onto the podcast today, what really drew me to this paper was your focus on Indigenous populations, certainly a audience that is understudied in the literature. And I loved your approach to concept mapping and this community collaboration. So with that being said, before I give away all of the good stuff, can you give us a brief overview of the paper, including what you did, as well as your results?
Yeah, I'll start us off. So this paper describes sort of two separate sub-studies. So one is a group concept mapping study, which is a really sort of iterative, community-driven or participant-driven data approach to developing a framework based in participant data on a particular concept. And so we did that with participants in a larger randomized control trial called the Indigenous-Supported Agriculture Study, or the Go Healthy Study. And so through that, we developed a framework for what is healthy eating for the Osage community. And we were really interested in doing that so we could understand for this overall intervention, how do we approach healthy eating and talking to people about it, and how do we educate and provide support for people who are trying to eat healthy in this community. So the first part was that group concept mapping study. It's a multi-phased sort of approach. It's really participant driven, where they provide feedback on a sample prompt, and then they sort statements that all the participants provided, and then that we do a multi-dimensional algorithm that makes a sort of fancy group concept map, which is really kind of a cool way of exploring community-driven definitions of health. And then for the second part, we developed the curriculum based on that framework that we talked about in that first study, and we brought it back to community members through focus groups to gather feedback on the curriculum we developed. For the group concept mapping part, we came up with, or it resulted in 5 clusters that represent what healthy eating means to the Osage community. So specifically, those include intergenerational connection through food. There's one cluster which is really powerful, this idea that healthy eating isn't just an individual act, it's really a collective act that connects us across generations. There's also positivity and intentionality with food. Really having positive food values and positive eating experiences helps us to drive our healthy eating behaviors. And of course, practicing those healthy food habits that we all know and talk about in nutrition. But one of the other ones that's really, or two, the last two that are really important are community values and support for healthy food practices. So again, really getting at this idea that social norms really do matter for healthy eating. And so if you have community values around healthy eating, those can really help to support healthy eating practices and overall better nutrition. And then the last one, participants talked a lot about food accessibility and independence. In a lot of Native communities, we experience really high rates of food insecurity. There's not good access to a lot of healthy foods. And so they talked a lot about some of the challenges, but also their goals, and really thinking about for healthy eating, we need to reduce dependence on outside food sources for this community so that they can grow their own foods and have their sort of what we call food sovereignty, so that community can have healthy eating all the time through their control, their methods, and their sort of values. That was for the group concept mapping. And then for the curriculum, we ended up with 8 different modules that describe different kinds of healthy eating, and they're really based in that theory of planned behavior. So there's a few different components to those modules, but the feedback from community members was so helpful. And our advisory group, which was composed of a group that helps our research team, so helpful for developing the curriculum in a way that really resonates with people and is useful for developing healthy eating practices. I'll pass it to Cassandra. Did you have anything to add to that for our results?
So, as Tara mentioned, the modules that resulted from the second part of the study were really strongly grounded in that group concept mapping work and these definitions and core clusters of what healthy eating meant to these community members. But to really turn those ideas into actionable aspects of behavior change, we were able to lean on the theory of planned behavior and identify the closest related construct within that theory to identify where there might be potential for change that individuals who are receiving these modules could resonate with and integrate into their own household and lifestyle. And so those 8 modules really build on ideas of attitudes, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control as they relate to the 5 concepts that community members said were key parts of healthy eating.
Great. Thanks very much for that overview. I appreciate it. And it was a pretty in-depth study. I imagine there are a lot of lessons learned. What do you think mainstream nutrition programs can learn from a culturally tailored approach like this one?
Yeah, I think one thing that we take for granted sometimes in the nutrition field is that healthy eating looks the same or is the same thing to every person. And I think one thing we can really think about is, what does it mean to each community and what does it look like? Because we know it does look different across cultures. And we often talk about that it does look different, but people still take for granted this idea that healthy eating is going to be the same across communities. So really critically examining sort of the epistemology and frameworks and really thinking about how can you integrate community perspectives and worldviews to really define what is healthy eating for this community and how can we work towards that goal. Like I mentioned earlier, for the Osage community, they're really interested in reducing dependence on outside food sources. And so for healthy eating for this community, that is part of that definition for them, but that's typically not included in a definition of healthy eating. So I think what I'm trying to say is, if I had something for people to take away, is really to critically examine like what epistemology and what definitions of health related, nutrition related concepts we're using, and then work with community to really make sure that those are actually what they mean, or if they're not, to really understand what they do mean to those communities.
And so are you able to kind of peel away what the community members themselves taught you through this project?
That's a great question. The community members always teach us so much, and I feel like it's always a really humbling but really inspiring experience. And I think one thing that really came to mind for me was really listening to their stories through those community engagements. So at the end of the group concept mapping project for the 3rd phase, we had sort of a feedback session with them to look at that map and figure out if it needed to be changed. And the stories and examples they shared really grounded it in their experience. And so I think if I took anything away from that, I think the lesson is that people have so much to teach us. We have things to teach them, of course, but they have more to teach us than we do them. And so really listening to them helped me really understand that healthy eating is different for that community than the community I live in.
That's such an important point, that we're learning from these communities just as much as maybe they're learning from us. So that reciprocal relationship is so important to recognize and acknowledge in this work.
I think one of the things that I was reminded of throughout this project, through the community engagement sessions, which we had several, was that individuals really are the experts of their own lives, right? And so the community members we spoke to were able to point towards healthy eating and healthy like physical activity behaviors that were historical as well as modern that they were doing, and things that were going to be more relevant and impactful in their lives than anything that we maybe would have come to them with. So really remembering that people know their own circumstance oftentimes much better than outside researchers can without having conversations with community members. And really that there is so much to connect over food, that during the conversations, anytime you're talking about food and eating and gathering people together, the conversations really highlight how food helps people connect.
So you bring up a really good point, Cassandra. People are experts of their own lives, and that food goes beyond that physical nourishment. So how does the curriculum address broader health and wellness goals like emotional or spiritual nourishment?
Thank you for that question. I think one of the main pieces of the resulting curriculum of this project was focused on fostering intergenerational connections through food and the ways that that can be accomplished. We were able to really highlight specific examples in each of the modules for individuals that they could practice to make those connections in their daily lives, because maintaining our health and wellness, whether it's physical, emotional, or spiritual, is a constant practice. And so having really concrete examples that we could point to or suggest in the modules was really important.
And just to build on that, I think so often when we think about nutrition, we're thinking so much about the physical parts of things. So we're thinking about what do people eat, how is their body utilizing that, and those sorts of things. And maybe we're thinking a little bit about where do we get them, or where do people get their foods from? Are they food insecure? Where the food source from? Those sorts of things. But one of the things we don't talk about enough is social connection through food, or relational connection. So really thinking of, like Cassandra said, with intergenerational connection through food, how are we connecting with people through food? And how does that facilitate a sense of belonging and well-being that's supportive to the overall idea of healthy eating? In addition to that, thinking about emotional health, I think oftentimes when we talk about emotional health and nutrition and food and eating, it's often in a negative context. People are talking about, eating your feelings in a negative way. Maybe you're eating because you're stressed or sad or depressed. But we really focused here about how eating brings positive emotions and how you can use food as a way to sort of feel well and to create a positive relationship with yourself. So really thinking about food as a way to nourish yourself and future generations too, because we all carry those genes within us. So really thinking about the sort of positive emotional spin of healthy eating. How does healthy eating help our positive emotions, rather than thinking about, if you don't eat well, you're going to have these negative emotions, really framing in that sort of strengths-based way of how can we be more well holistically by thinking about physical, spiritual, emotional, and relational well-being.
That's a wonderful way to wrap up our podcast today. Thanks so much to both of you for participating in this and talking with me. Before I end this, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, absolutely. In addition to my incredible co-first author, Tara Maudrie, I also want to acknowledge our other contributing authors from the Center for Indigenous Health Research and Policy at Oklahoma State University, which includes Susie Lopez, Kaylee Klima, Christina Gabriel, and Dr. Valerie Bloomberg-Jernigan, as well as our co-authors from Osage Nation, which include Jan Heyman and Addie Hudgens. And then in addition, I'd like to acknowledge that we received support from grants that were from the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities, as well as the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases from the National Institutes of Health. And finally, simply to acknowledge that Osage Nation and Harvest Land Farms were really grateful and inspired by the work that they're doing to nourish their community and also restore relational connection to food, though the research does not reflect the official views of Osage Nation. Thank you.
Thanks so much again, Tara and Cassandra, for talking with me today. To all of our listeners, remember, you can read this article in full at www.jneb.org for free for the next 3 months.